Tonight I will tell you a story so heavy, so inevitable. It feels like the weight of an old Colt resting in your palm before you even know why you drew it. This is the high, lonesome country of Montana, where every sunset bleeds gold over land that remembers blood, where men build fences not to keep things in, but to keep the past out. It starts with nothing more than a stranger buying a dead man's ranch and one small, polite refusal to sing in church. One refusal. One extra box of ammunition for wolves. One dead horse with a throat opened clean by a blade that knew exactly what it was doing. That was all it took. Because some ghosts don't haunt houses. Some ghosts haunt the men who made them. And the towns foolish enough to shelter them. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The sun hung low over Crimson Valley, bleeding gold across the Montana frontier like a wound that wouldn't quite heal. The air carried the dry scent of barnwood and sagebrush, mixed with the faint, earthy tang of cattle dung warming under the fading light. Cole Harlan drove the last nail into the fence post with a deliberate swing of the hammer, the thud echoing soft against the wind-rustled cottonwoods. His hands, calloused and scarred from years that felt like someone else's life, moved slow, methodical. No rush, no wasted motion. Just the rhythm of a man piecing together a quiet existence, one rail at a time. He'd bought the Turner place a week back from Mara Holt, the widow who'd held on to those 500 acres like a promise to her dead husband. She'd seen something in his eyes, steady, unyielding, and confided as much to Lila Kane down at the general store. Cole hadn't argued. He'd paid cash, no questions, and set to work rebuilding what time and neglect had worn down. He'd kept his distance there, too, sitting with his back to the wall in Lila's store, buying ammunition in bulk for wolves, as he muttered to her curious gaze. At Sunday service, he perched in the back pew, lips sealed during the hymn's eyes on the door. Invitations to supper from folks like Mara or Doc Silas Reed. Politely turned down everyone. Let them whisper about the silent rancher. Better that than the truth. The wind picked up, carrying a chill that promised autumn's bite. Cole straightened hammer in hand and turned to fetch another nail from his pouch. That's when it came, a sharp crack like a dry branch snapping underfoot. Not the wind. Too deliberate, too close. He froze, ears straining against the quiet. The cottonwood sighed, leaves whispering secrets, but no bird startled, no critter scurried. His gaze flicked to the tree line at the edge of the property, where dust hung faint in the air, disturbed just enough to notice. Footprints, no, nothing clear, but something had been there watching, maybe. His fingers tightened on the hammer's handle, knuckles whitening. The old instincts surged, draw the Colt stock forward, confront whatever shadow lurked. But he held back. No, not here. Not now. He'd come to this valley for peace, fragile as it was. Stirring trouble would shatter it, drag him back into the dust and blood he'd buried. He exhaled slow, loosening his grip, and drove the next nail home with a single, measured blow. The sound rang hollow in the gathering dusk. As evening deepened, Cole gathered his tools and headed for the house. The creak of the porch steps under his boots, a familiar comfort. The air inside smelled of oiled leather and faint wood smoke from the morning fire. He hung his duster on a peg, poured water from the pitcher to wash his face. Splashing cold against his skin, he caught his reflection in the small, cracked mirror nailed to the wall. Eyes like chipped flint stared back, shadowed by memories he couldn't outrun. And then, in the glass's edge, a flicker far out on the road, winding from the ridge, a lone horse stood motionless, rider, cloaked in twilight. No face visible, just a silhouette against the dying light. Cole's breath caught. The figure lingered a heartbeat longer, then wheeled away into the brush, vanishing like smoke. He turned from the mirror hand, drifting to his side, but the house remained silent, empty. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying the distant low of cattle. Whatever was coming, it knew he was here. The morning sun slanted hard across Providence Springs, turning the dust of Main Street into a pale, shimmering haze. The air smelled of fresh-baked bread from the bakery down the block, undercut by the sharper bite of horse sweat and oiled leather from the livery next door. Cole Harlan walked the plank sidewalk with measured steps, boots scraping soft against weathered boards. He carried the same canvas sack slung over one shoulder, empty now, except for the faint jingle of coins. His black duster hung open, the Colt Navy riding low and familiar against his hip. He told himself this was just another errand, more ammunition, a sack of coffee nails for the barn. Routine. Safe. Lila Kane's general store bell chimed as he pushed through the door. The place smelled of tobacco linseed oil and the faint sweetness of dried apples in the barrel by the counter. Lila looked up from sorting bolts of calico, her smile quick but careful. "Morning, Mr. Harlan." Back so soon, Cole nodded, once voice low. "Need another box of 44s. And coffee. Ground fine." She moved behind the counter without pressing, though her eyes flicked to the way his right hand rested near his belt, closer than most men kept it in a quiet town. While she weighed the coffee, Cole's gaze drifted to the wall behind her. Wanted posters yellowed and curling at the edges. Faces he'd seen before, names he'd carried like stones in his pockets. One in particular caught him, a sketch of a hard-eyed man with a scar across the cheek. No name printed beneath it yet, but the reward was climbing. Cole stared longer than he meant to, the old weight settling in his chest, painted rock smoke still in his lungs, the crackle of burning timber, the small final sounds his wife had made before silence took her. He blinked, looked away. The bell chimed again. Heavy boots. A low chuckle from the doorway. Brody Slade leaned against the frame, arms crossed, spurs glinting in the sunlight that spilled across the floorboards. Younger than his brothers, leaner, meaner in the way boys sometimes are when they've got too much to prove. His hat sat low, shadowing eyes that didn't blink. He watched Cole the way a coyote watches a lame calf. Lila's hand stilled on the scale. Brody pushed off the door jamb, sauntering inside like he owned the place. "Well, now," he drawled loud enough for the street to hear, "looks like our new rancher's stocking up again. Must be some big old wolves out in Crimson Valley, huh, Miss Kane? Or maybe just one real mean one." Lila's mouth tightened. She glanced at Cole quick and worried, then back to Brody. "Folks buy what they need, Brody. You know that." Brody grinned, teeth flashing. "Sure do. Just wondering is all." He stepped closer to the counter, blocking the narrow aisle to the door. Not quite accidental. Cole felt the shift in the room, the way the two old-timers at the checkerboard near the stove stopped moving pieces, the way the air thickened. His pulse stayed steady, but the fear was there, small and cold, curling under his ribs. Not fear of Brody. Fear of what came after. Of being seen. Of the quiet life he'd tried to stitch together, unraveling thread by thread. He paid for the goods in silence, coins clinking deliberate on the wood. Lila slid the sack across without a word. Cole turned to leave. Brody didn't move. For a heartbeat, Cole considered stepping around, backing down, keeping the peace. But the aisle was narrow, and Brody's grin said he knew it. Cole met the younger man's eyes, flat and unreadable, then shouldered past close enough that their coats brushed. Brody laughed, once soft and mean, but didn't reach. Outside, the sun hit Cole like a slap. He walked straight, sack heavy against his thigh, aware of eyes following him down the boardwalk. a woman whispered to her companion as he passed. He just walked right by like Brody wasn't even there. Another voice, lower man's got something to hide, mark my words. Cole kept his face blank. Inside, though, the old ache stirred humiliation, small but sharp, like a thorn under the skin. He'd lost something here today, a sliver of trust from Lila, a whisper of respect from the town. Not much. Just enough to remind him how fragile the mask was. At the corner, he paused to adjust the sack. Behind him, Brody's voice drifted out through the open door, low, but clear, meant for the man with him. I'd bet my last dollar that fellas heard the name Slade before. And I reckon he don't like what he remembers. Cole's hand tightened on the strap. He didn't turn, didn't need to. The words landed like a stone in still water ripples spreading outward, slow and inevitable. He started walking again, boots kicking up faint dust that hung in the morning light. The town felt smaller now, the streets narrower. And somewhere behind him, in the shadow of Lila's doorway, a line had been drawn, one neither man had spoken aloud, but both understood. The reckoning wasn't here yet, but it knew his name. The bell in the Providence Springs church tower tolled slow and heavy, each note hanging in the warm Sunday afternoon air, like a warning no one wanted to hear. Dust motes drifted through slanted sunlight that poured through the tall windows, catching on the worn pews and the bowed heads of the congregation. The preacher's voice rose and fell. In familiar cadence, grace, redemption, the mercy of a patient God. But Cole Harlan heard none of it clearly. He sat in the last row back, straight against the hard oak hat resting on his knee. His hands lay folded, scarred knuckles resting one atop the other, but his eyes never left the double doors at the far end of the aisle. Mara Holt occupied the pew just ahead and to his right. She wore black bombazine, the same dress she'd worn the day she signed over the Turner deed, and her shoulders carried the quiet strength of a woman who'd buried her husband and kept the land anyway. When the hymn started, Rock of Ages, she sang soft but true voice blending with the others. Cole's lips stayed sealed. He never joined in, never had. The words felt too much like promises he couldn't keep. The service ended with a murmured amen that rippled through the room. Folks rose, stretching stiff limbs, exchanging quiet greetings. Cole waited until the aisle cleared before standing. He slipped out a side door into the churchyard where cottonwood leaves rustled overhead, and the smell of fresh-turned earth from the nearby graves mingled with wood smoke drifting from town chimneys. Mara lingered near the steps, speaking with two older women from the sewing circle. Cole kept his distance, leaning against the low stone wall, watching without seeming to watch. He told himself it was habit, always knowing where the exits were, always counting heads, but the truth sat heavier today. Brody's words from Lila's store still echoed in his skull. He's heard the name Slade before. The ripples had started, and now he saw them reach Mara. Cal Slade appeared from the crowd, like he'd been waiting for the moment. Taller than Brody, quieter, dressed in a dark coat that looked too clean for a man who rode with outlaws. He approached Mara with the polite tip of his hat voice, smooth as riverstone. "Mrs. Holt," he said loud enough for the nearby knot of people to hear. "Fine sermon today. Preachers got away with words about trust and strangers." Mara turned smile polite but thin. "He does." Cal glanced toward the yard eyes, finding Cole for the barest second before returning to her. "Heard you sold that Turner spread to a newcomer. Quiet fella. Keeps to himself." He paused, letting the silence do the work. "Must have been a hard choice handing over land that's been in the family. You ain't worried?" Bringing trouble down on the whole valley. Mara's face paled. Her hand lifted halfway to her throat, then dropped. She looked past Cal straight at Cole, standing 30 paces away under the cottonwood shade. Her eyes held a flicker of something raw, not accusation, but fear. The kind that comes when you realize kindness might cost more than you thought. Cole felt it like a blade sliding under his ribs. He could cross the yard in 10 strides, put himself between them, speak low and clear, leave her be. But the words would carry. Eyes would turn. Questions would follow. And the mask he'd worn so carefully, the silent rancher, nothing more, would crack wide open. He stayed where he was, hands at his sides, breathing slow. Cal tipped his hat again, courteous as a preacher. Just concerning myself with the community's welfare, ma'am. That's all. He walked away, boots crunching gravel, leaving a wake of murmurs. The women near Mara exchanged glances. One touched her arm. You all right, Mara? Another lowered her voice. That rancher, Turner Place. Something ain't right about him, I reckon. Mara didn't answer. She gathered her shawl tighter and started toward the gate. When she passed Cole, she didn't speak. Just a small, tight nod, the barest acknowledgement, and kept walking. Cole watched her go, the ache in his chest, spreading like spilled ink. He'd wanted to protect this place. Instead, he was poisoning it, one whisper at a time. From across the street, Doc Silas Reed stood in the doorway of his office, arms folded. The doctor's gaze settled on Cole, steady knowing. He'd seen the old bullet scars on Cole's forearm months back, stitched a fresh cut that looked too clean for ranch work. Silas hadn't asked then. He didn't ask now. But the look said enough. I see you, and I'm not blind. Cole turned away first. Dusk had settled by the time he rode back to the Turner place. The valley lay quiet under a sky gone bruised purple, the first stars sharp as knife points. He unsaddled the horse in the barn, rubbed her down slow, letting the familiar motions dull the edge of the day. Then he walked the fence line by lantern light, checking posts. He found her near the north corner. Mara's bay mare lay on her side in the grass legs, stiff eyes already clouded. No bullet hole, no blood trail. Just a clean slash across the throat, precise, deliberate. The cut had been made with a sharp blade, not in frenzy, but in cold purpose. The reins had been sliced clean through. Cole knelt beside the animal. The hide was still warm. He touched the wound once, fingers coming away dark. The smell of copper and wet earth rose thick in his throat. He sat back on his heels, staring at the dead horse, at the empty night beyond the fence. No note. No tracks worth following. Just this. He rose slowly, lantern light trembling in his grip. The house stood dark ahead, windows blank as closed eyes. He could ride to town now, wake Mara, tell her what he'd found. Or he could bury the mare himself, say nothing, let the rumor grow unchecked. His hand drifted to the Colt at his hip. The metal felt heavier tonight. Somewhere down the valley road, a coyote yipped once sharp, lonely, then fell silent. Cole extinguished the lantern. Darkness rushed in, soft and complete. He stood there a long time, listening to the wind move through the cottonwoods, feeling the slow, inevitable weight of what was coming, settled deeper into his bones. The moon rode low over Crimson Valley, a thin silver sickle scraping through thin clouds, casting long, jagged shadows across the Turner place. The night smelled of dry grass, cooling after a hot day, and the faint metallic bite of gun oil. Cole Harlan sat alone on the porch rail, the old Colt Navy resting across his knees. He'd cleaned it earlier by lantern light, slow strokes of the rag along the barrel, the soft click of the cylinder spinning. Empty, the familiar weight settling into his palm, like an old debt come due. He hadn't fired it in years, not since the last unmarked grave in New Mexico territory. tonight it felt heavier. Inside the house, a single lamp burned low, throwing fractured yellow across the yard. The cattle stirred once in the distant corral. Hooves shifting in the dust, then fell quiet. Cole listened. The wind moved soft through the cottonwoods, but beneath it came another sound, distant at first, then clearer, the rhythmic thud of hooves on hardpack. 4 horses, not galloping, not hiding, coming deliberate. He rose without hurry, coat whispering against the rail. The Colt slid into his belt, familiar as breath. He stepped off the porch into the dark boots, silent on the packed earth, and melted toward the barn's shadow. The night accepted him the way it always had, cool, complete, no questions. They rode in from the east ridge, 4 silhouettes against the star-pricked sky. No torches, but no effort to muffle the jingle of spurs or the creak of saddle leather. One man muttered voice, carrying on the still air, "Garrett wants to know who this rancher really is. Quiet ones got the most to hide." Cole waited behind the hay shed, back to the wall, breathing slow. His heart beat steady, not fast, not slow, just there like it had been every night since Painted Rock. The riders dismounted near the fence-line boots, hitting ground with soft thumps. They spread out, 1 heading for the house, 2 toward the barn, the last circling wide, like he was looking for a back door. No guns drawn yet. Not yet. The first man reached the porch, hand on the rail, peering toward the lit window. Cole moved, then silent shadow to shadow, until he was behind the nearest intruder. The man never heard the approach. Cole's forearm hooked around his throat, quick and sure, the other hand clamping over his mouth. A muffled grunt boot scraping dirt, then stillness. Cole lowered him, easy, unconscious, but breathing, and dragged him behind the shed. The second came next, stepping into the barn doorway. Cole was already there, stepped out of the gloom like he'd been part of it all along. The man spun, hand dropping to his holster. Cole caught the wrist mid-motion, twisted hard. Bone cracked soft. The man gasped, knees buckling. Cole drove an elbow into the side of his neck, precise, controlled, and the intruder folded without a sound. The third and fourth heard the scuffle. They came running, boots pounding. Cole met them in the open yard of moonlight, silvering the grass. One drew fast, too fast for most men. Cole didn't draw. He stepped inside the swing, drove a fist into the man's gut, then brought the butt of the Colt down across his temple. The fourth lunged, knife flashing. Cole sidestepped, caught the wrist, wrenched it up and back until the blade clattered to the dirt. A knee to the ribs, then a clean chop to the neck. 4 down, none dead. He worked quick in the dark bound wrists with rawhide from the barn, gagged them with strips torn from their own bandanas. He found a scrap of paper in one man's pocket, a pencil stub. He wrote in block letters, slow and careful, "Next time send better men or come yourself. Tell Garrett the lady doesn't need new arrangements." He pinned the note to the shirt of the first man he'd taken down, the one who'd spoken Garrett's name. Then he led their horses 4 at a time, saddled the unconscious men across the saddles like sacks of grain. The animals stamped uneasy with the smell of fear, sweat, and blood. But Cole steadied them with a low murmur. Dawn was graying the eastern ridge when he slapped the lead horse's rump. The string lurched forward, heading down the road toward Providence Springs. Cole watched them go until the dust swallowed them, and then turned back to the house. The lamp still burned inside. He blew it out, the sudden dark rushing in like cold water. He sat on the porch steps, Colt across his lap again. The valley lay quiet now, but the quiet felt different, thinner, stretched tight. He'd crossed a line tonight. Not with bullets, with a message. With 4 bound men riding home to tell their boss exactly who they'd found. Somewhere far down the trail, a coyote howled once long, mournful, then cut off sharp. Cole stared at his hands. They didn't shake. They never had. But the old weight in his chest had grown heavier, pressing against ribs that still remembered smoke and screams. Mara's dead mare. Lila's worried glance. The whispers in town. All of it led here. He looked toward the road where the horses had vanished. The sun would crest soon. Garrett Slade would read the note. And then the valley would answer. Cole rose slowly, coat settling around him like a shroud. He walked back into the house door, closing soft behind him. The morning light crept across the porch, empty now, except for a single drop of blood drying dark on the rail. The days after the four riders returned to their boss stretched thin and brittle across Crimson Valley, like old leather left too long in the sun. Dust hung perpetual in the air, stirred by restless wind and the steady tramp of new boots into Providence Spring. 30 hard men arrived in ones and twos, scarred faces from Kansas saloons, quick trigger drifters out of Colorado mining camps, even a couple of Mexican gun hands, who spoke little and watched everything. They filled the saloon by noon, leaning elbows on the scarred bar, voices low, but carrying. The smell of cheap whiskey and unwashed trail clothes thickened the room until it pressed against the windows like smoke. Cole Harlan kept to the Turner place by daylight. He mended fence rails with slow, deliberate swings of the hammer, the ring of steel on steel echoing across the empty acres. He moved cattle from one pasture to another, checking brands, cutting out strays. Routine. Visible. A man doing nothing more than what a rancher ought. But the work felt hollow now, each nail driven a reminder that the quiet he'd bought with blood and silence was ending. At night, the mask slipped. Under cover of moonless dark, he walked the property lines, stringing thin tripwires low across approaches, marking clear fields of fire from the barn roof and the ridge behind the house. He dug shallow scrapes in the earth near the corral, places a man could drop and vanish. He oiled the Winchester carbine he kept in the barn loft, checked loads in the old Colt Navy, positioned extra ammunition tins where they'd be reached without thought. No grand plan, just preparation. The kind born of knowing what men like Garrett Slade did when pride got cut. In town, the pressure settled heavier. Deputy Finn Pike rode out to the Turner place one afternoon, hat in hand, face flushed from the ride, and something deeper. Mr. Harlan Finn said, voice cracking on the edges. Saloon's full of strangers. They're asking after you. Not polite questions. And they're leaning on folks. Lila's store got turned over last night. Drawers dumped, shelves knocked. No money taken, just mess. Mara Holt. One of them stopped her on the boardwalk, told her she'd best watch who she sells land to. Said it friendly-like, but she ain't slept since. Cole kept his eyes on the post hole he was digging spade, biting deep into dry earth. They threatened her direct, Finn swallowed. Not in so many words. But she's locking doors early now. Kids ain't playing outside no more. Folks are scared and they're starting to look sideways at anybody new. That means you. Cole drove the spade in again. Dirt flew in dark arcs. He felt the old fear coil low in his gut, not for himself, but for the ripple he'd started. Mara's dead horse had been the first stone. Now the water was spreading. That evening, he wrapped the old medical satchel, the one he'd carried out of painted rock, still smelling faintly of carbolic and dried blood in oilcloth. Inside sutures, morphine vials, bandages, yellowed but clean. He rode into town after dark, left the bundle on Doc Silas Reed's back step with a folded note tucked under the strap. You might need this. No signature. No explanation. He was gone before the lamp in the office window flared brighter. Word traveled quiet but sure. Eli Boone, far north in Wyoming, received the telegram at a crossroads station. The operator handed it over without comment. Boone read the 4 words once, then again, the paper trembling faintly in his hand. The ghost rides again. Providence Springs. Come quick. He folded it into his vest pocket, saddled his horse without a word to the station man, and turned south. Rafe, Cutler, Cade, Jace, Riker, they'd get the same message soon enough. The old debt was calling. Night before the storm broke, Cole sat alone on the porch rail coat draped over his shoulders against the chill that had crept into the valley. The sky to the east was turning the color of fresh spilled blood, a slow, angry red that bled across the ridges. He held a tin cup of coffee gone cold, staring at the horizon where the road wound out of sight. He thought of Mara's face in the churchyard, pale and trusting once. Lila's hands shaking as she weighed his coffee. The children who no longer laughed in the streets. The weight of it all pressed down heavier than any gun he'd ever carried. They won't heed warnings, he whispered to the empty dark. Somewhere far down the valley, faint but unmistakable, the low thunder of many hooves rolled across the plain. Not one horse, not four. Dozens, coming from every direction at once. Cole set the cup down. The tin clinked once against the rail, then silence swallowed it. He rose coat settling around him like a second skin and stepped into the yard. The red dawn crept higher, staining the grass the color of old wounds. The reckoning had arrived. The first light of dawn broke cold and thin over Crimson Valley, a pale streak bleeding across the eastern ridge like a fresh scar. Mist clung low to the grass, curling around fence posts and the legs of the cattle that stood motionless in the corral. The air tasted of frost and pine resin, sharp enough to cut the lungs. Cole Harlan stood on the porch coat, unbuttoned the old Colt Navy heavy at his hip, and the Winchester cradled in the crook of his arm. He had not slept. Sleep had become a stranger years ago. From the high ground above the ranch, shadows moved. Garrett Slade's men fanned out in a wide arc, 30 strong now, maybe more rifles glinting dull in the gray light. They moved with the practiced quiet of professionals who had done this before Kansas. Quick draws Colorado knife men, silent Mexicans who preferred the blade to the bullet. Garrett sat his black stallion at the center of the line coat, flapping in the rising wind, face calm as stone. Beside him, Cal Slade leaned close, voice low, but carrying on the still air. "That's him," Cal murmured, "the ghost of Painted Rock. He was the deputy. We burned his family." Garrett's eyes narrowed, measuring the lone figure on the porch below. "Then today we finish what we started." Cole heard every word. Sound traveled clean in the valley at dawn. He felt no surge of rage, no hot rush of vengeance. Only a deep, familiar weariness, the kind that settles into bone after too many graves. Painted Rock rose unbidden in his mind, the crackle of flames swallowing timber, the small, choking cries cut short the smell of charred flesh that never quite left his clothes. He had hunted those responsible for 2 years afterward, left bodies cooling in desert sand, earned the name they whispered now. And still, it was never enough. The past did not die clean. He stepped off the porch into the yard boots, crunching frost. No grand speech, no drawn-out challenge. Just the slow walk forward, rifle steady, but not raised. Up on the ridge, 5 silhouettes appeared against the paling sky: Eli Boone Rafe, Cutler, Cade, Jace Riker, and one more whose face Cole knew without seeing. The Judgment Riders. They had come without fanfare dusters, trailing like storm clouds, rifles already in hand. Boone's voice drifted down low and certain. "We rode with him after Painted Rock. We're riding with him now." The words landed like stones in still water. A ripple of unease moved through Garrett's line. Men shifted, glanced at one another. The ghost was no longer alone. Cole stopped in the open ground between house and barn. His voice carried clear calm without heat. 8 years, he said. I waited to see you again, Cal. You gave the order. Cal Slade stiffened in the saddle. His hand hovered near his revolver, but he did not draw. You should have been dead. Cole's gaze never wavered. I was. What you're meeting now is only the ghost. The words hung between them, heavy as lead. No one moved for a long breath. Then Garrett raised a hand, sharp final. Take him. Rifles cracked from the ridge, first controlled shots aimed to wound, not kill. Men in Garrett's line jerked, clutched shoulders, staggered. The Black Ridge brothers charged the barn and made it halfway before Lee had cut them down, bodies folding into the dust. Cole moved, then not fast, not showy, just deliberate. He dropped to one knee behind a water trough, levered the Winchester, and fired once, twice. A man spun, clutching a shattered thigh. Another fell clutching his arm, precise, merciful in its way. He did not aim for the heart. Cal Slade broke from the line horse, rearing as he spurred toward the house. Cole Rose stepped into the open. Cal saw him coming and rained hard pistol-clearing leather. Cole fired first clean through the shoulder. Cal's gun clattered to the dirt. He slid from the saddle, gasping blood blooming dark across his coat. Cole walked to him, boots slow across the frozen grass. He knelt close enough to smell the fear sweat and copper. You burned them? Cole said quietly. Watch the house go up. Listen to them scream. Cal's breath came ragged. Do it quick. Cole studied him a long moment. The old rage was there, coiled tight, but something else held it back, the faces of Mara Holt, Lila Kane, the children who had stopped playing in the streets, the town below. He holstered the Colt without firing again. I won't give you the easy way out, he said. You live with it. He rose, turned away. Behind him, the fight spread, judgment riders descending the ridge like shadows, given form shots cracking sharp across the valley. Men fell wounded more than dead. Blood soaked the frost, turning it pink and black. No cheers, no triumph. Just the ugly work of ending something that should never have started. Cole walked back toward the house, rifle still warm in his hands. The red dawn had climbed higher, staining the ridges the color of old fire. He knew even as the last echoes died that Painted Rock would never leave him. The screams would still come in the quiet hours. The smoke would still linger in his clothes. But the town below still stood. He paused at the porch steps, listening to the wind carry the distant cries of the wounded. Somewhere in the mist, a horse whinnied, once sharp panicked, then fell silent. The day had only just begun. The rain came down in sheets, hammering the tin roofs of Providence Springs like 1,000 angry fists. Water sluiced off eaves in cold ropes, turning Main Street into a shallow, muddy river that reflected the sporadic muzzle flashes in broken silver. The smell of wet wood and gunpowder hung thick undercut by the copper tang of blood already soaking into the dirt. Thunder rolled low along the mountains, close enough to rattle teeth, but the real storm was inside the town's saloon doors, swinging wild livery stable doors, barred from within shadows, shifting behind shattered windows. Cole Harlan moved through it all without haste. Rain streamed off his hat brim, darkening the shoulders of his black duster, until it clung like a second skin. His boots sucked at the mud with each step, but he did not slip. He did not run. The Colt Navy rode familiar at his hip. The Winchester was slung across his back barrel down to keep the rain from the action. Every movement carried the weight of Painted Rock smoke in his throat, small hands reaching out before the flames took them, but he kept it locked behind his eyes. There was no room for rage tonight, only necessity. Inside the saloon, Garrett Slade stood at the bar coat, dripping face carved from granite. 20 men remained of the 30 who had ridden in, some wounded, all desperate. Brody Slade paced near the bat-wing doors, revolver in hand, eyes wild. Cal Slade leaned against the wall shoulder, bandaged roughly from the dawn fight face, pale but set. "We burn it all if we have to," Garrett said, voice cutting through the drum of rain. "The rancher, the town, the whole damn valley. No witnesses, no stories." Brody laughed once brittle. "Let's start with the church. Preacher's got a bell tower, good place to pick 'em off." Outside, Cole reached the livery stable first. The double doors were barred, but lamplight leaked through the cracks. He heard voices inside, harness jingling, horses stamping, nervous. He circled to the side wall, found a loose board, pried it silent with the Winchester's lever. Rain masked the creak. He slipped inside. The smell of wet hay and horse sweat closed around him. Cal Slade turned at the sound pistol, half raised. Their eyes met across the dim space. Cole stepped forward, water pooling at his feet. "Today is where it ends," he said quietly. Cal's hand trembled once, then steadied. "Do it quick." Cole raised the Colt. One clean shot, center mass. Cal folded into the straw without a sound, eyes wide in the lantern glow, surprise more than pain. Cole did not linger. He moved on. In the street, Brody burst from the saloon, firing wild into the rain. A bullet clipped Cole's left shoulder, hot sting blood blooming warm under the coat, but he did not falter. He levered the Winchester, fired once. "You think you can bury us all?" Cole did not answer with words. He raised the Colt one last time. 2 shots. Garrett staggered, one bullet through the chest, the other grazing the heart. He dropped to his knees in the mud eyes, locked on Cole's disbelief, giving way to something darker. Then he fell forward, face into the muck still. Silence followed, sudden heavy. The rain lessened to a steady patter. Thunder drifted away toward the peaks. Men groaned in the street, wounded more than dead. Judgment riders gathered without a word, rifles lowered. No cheers, no victory cries. Just the soft hiss of rain on hot barrels. Cole stood in the center of it all, coat heavy with water and blood, shoulder throbbing in time with his pulse. He looked down at Garrett's body, then at Cal's silhouette still visible through the livery door. The faces of his wife and child flickered, once small, trusting, gone, and the ache came fresh, sharper than the wound in his arm. He turned slowly. Lila Kane stepped from her doorway, face streaked with rain and soot from a small fire that had caught in Mara's stable before they doused it. Mara herself stood beside her, clutching a shawl, eyes wide but steady. Doc Silas rose from the boy he'd bandaged, nodded once to Cole, no words needed. Cole met their gazes. The town was still here. Damaged, bullet-pocked walls, a burning smell, lingering children who would wake crying from nightmares, but standing. Marshal Dax Wilder and his deputies rode in at last, lanterns swinging too late for the worst of it. They dismounted in silence, taking in the scene. Cole walked past them without speaking. He climbed the steps to Lila's porch, leaned against the post, and watched the rain ease. Blood dripped slow from his sleeve, pooling dark on the boards. The storm was passing. The valley breathed again, shallow, wounded, but breathing. He looked toward the distant ridge where his ranch waited dark against the clearing sky, then back to the town lamps flickering on again in windows, small points of light against the night. No triumph lived in his chest. Only the knowledge that some scars never fade and some ghosts never truly rest. A single drop of rain fell from the eave above him, striking the porch rail with a soft, final sound. He closed his eyes for one long breath. The night held its silence, waiting for whatever came next. Weeks had passed since the rain stopped, and the blood dried into the mud of Main Street. Providence Springs breathed again, shallow at first, then steadier. The bullet holes in Lila Kane's storefront had been patched with fresh boards, planed smooth but still showing pale against the weathered gray. Mara Holt's livery stable carried a faint char smell that lingered when the wind shifted, right a reminder no amount of whitewash could erase. The churchyard held 3 new Graves townsmen caught in crossfire names carved simple on pine markers. Children played again in the afternoons, their laughter thin and tentative like birds testing wings after a long storm. Cole Harlan kept to the Turner place most days. He rose before first light mended fence rails with the same slow hammer swings, moved cattle between pastures, checked water troughs for cracks. The work grounded him, gave his hands something to do while his mind wandered old paths. His left shoulder still ached when the weather turned damp, a clean through and through from a stray round in the rain. Doc Silas Reed had stitched it without comment, the scar now a puckered line under his shirt. It pulled when he reached high, a small constant reminder that some things never quite heal clean. He sat on the porch one late afternoon, the old Colt Navy disassembled across his knees. The rag moved slow along the barrel oil, gleaming dark in the slanting sun. The valley lay quiet below cottonwoods, turning gold at the edges, a hawk circling high on thermals. He did not smile. He did not frown. Just the steady rhythm of cloth on steel, the faint metallic scent mixing with wood smoke from the chimney. Hoofbeats approached from the road, slow, deliberate. Eli Boone rode up alone, dust coating his duster hat pulled low. He dismounted without flourish, tied off at the rail, and climbed the steps. Cole did not rise. Boone leaned against a post, thumbs hooked in his belt. "The others send regards," Boone said. "Rafe, Cade, Jace. They're scattered again, but word's out. If you ever need us, just send word." Cole nodded, once eyes on the revolver parts. Some debts never really end. Boone studied him a long moment. "You ain't the same man who rode out a painted rock." Cole's hand stilled. "No, I ain't." Boone pushed off the post. "Town's talkin'. Call you Ghost still. But it's different now. Protector, some say. Others just look away when you pass." He paused. "You staying?" Cole reassembled the Colt with practiced motions, cylinder clicking home, hammer eased down. "For now." Boone mounted up again, touched his hat brim. "Watch your back. Red Hawk's name still floats on the wind. Vance Crow, too. Legends draw trouble like flies to honey." He turned his horse and rode out, dust trailing faint behind him. Cole watched until the rider vanished over the ridge, then set the revolver on the rail beside him. The valley stretched wide and empty, but it no longer felt like a place to hide. In town, life stitched itself back together, thread by thread. Lila Kane reopened her store earlier each day, shelves restocked, though her hands sometimes shook when she reached for the coffee grinder. She rode out to the Turner place one evening with a covered basket, cornbread beans, a slab of bacon. Cole met her on the porch. They sat in silence on the steps, sharing the food without words. No declarations, no promises, just the quiet company of 2 people who had seen too much and still chose to stay. When she left, she touched his arm, once light, brief, then rode back into the gathering dark. At Doc Silas Reed's office, Colt Vance, once a gun for hire, now wore a deputy's badge pinned crooked on his vest. He helped the doctor change bandages on the wounded, boiled instruments without complaint. One afternoon, as Eli Boone passed through town on his way north, Silas leaned against the doorway and spoke low. "Men like him," Silas said, nodding toward the distant ranch, "they're the cost of peace in a savage land." Boone looked back once, then kept riding. Sheriff Cade Harlan sat in his office that same week, pen scratching across report pages. "Most wounds were clean," he wrote. "Shoulder, thigh, arm. He aimed to wound, not kill. He set the pen down, stared at the words a long time, then closed the ledger. Cole walked into town the following Sunday. He took a seat near the middle of the church pews, not the back row anymore. When the hymn started, he did not sing, but he stayed. Mara Holt sat 2 rows ahead. She turned once, met his eyes, and offered a small, steady nod. After service, she invited him to supper. He accepted. That evening, Cole stood alone on the high ridge overlooking the valley. Lamps glowed warm in windows, below small, steady points against the dark. The wind carried faint sounds, a child's laugh, the creak of a porch swing, the low murmur of voices. Painted rock lingered in him, still the smoke, the screams, the silence after, but it no longer owned him entire. He looked east where Boone had ridden away, carrying the story of the ghost to whatever trails lay ahead. Then west toward open country, where trouble might one day ride back. Cole touched the scar on his shoulder through the coat. It ached dull and familiar. He did not flinch. The valley breathed beneath him, wounded, healing alive. He turned back toward the ranch boots, crunching frost-kissed grass. The night deepened, stars sharp overhead. Somewhere far off, a coyote called Once Long Lonely, then the wind took the sound away. Cole kept walking. The lamp in his window burned steady, waiting. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening and for allowing this story to speak to your heart. The Wild West still holds countless truths, some painful, some tender, all worth remembering. Stay with us, subscribe, comment, and invite others to discover these untamed stories. From our hearts to yours. Thank you for being part of this journey. Aviso legal, bar a disclaimer. Each story shared here is produced for storytelling enjoyment. Certain scenes may include fictional or dramatized elements inspired by historical circumstances. Although AI tools assist us in visuals narration and script development, the emotional tone, editing, and quality control are conducted by people to ensure meaningful experiences. We fully uphold YouTube's policies using no deceptive recreations or impersonations of real individuals. All creative resources are properly licensed. Unauthorized copying, re-uploading, or remixing is not permitted. Thank you for supporting the effort behind every episode we create.